All right, so today is a fun one because we're going to talk about the custom amount field. This is one where I feel like you and I have run through this with many clients of like the challenges that it brings us. We're going to talk about it only from the Salesforce side today. So if you are a Dynamics user, just beware. We're not going to, there's other quirks to it there. But we're gonna approach it with the classic elementary style, which is asking the 5 W's, which are who, what, when, where, why. The where is already outlined for you, as you can see on the screen. You have where you go to My Account and Settings. You go into the CRM section. You click on Opportunities. This is where you can find it all. But we're going to talk about the other W's today. So you ready, Casey?
I'm all set.
Cool. All right, so who would use this custom amount field? Who's this really for?
Absolutely. Any organization that does any reporting and has, a high importance placed upon non-standard amount fields within the CRM. So obviously on any given opportunity, there's an amount, and that matters a lot for what we're doing as far as attribution, revenue, etc. However, there are some shops that are more sophisticated than that. Maybe you guys run reporting based largely off of monthly recurring revenue, MRR. Maybe you have ARR, annual recurring revenue. Maybe you are pulling in a specific portion that's only allocated to sales, or maybe there are any number of factors that go into your kind of de facto or sophisticated revenue amount for your organization. And if you choose to report on that as your, again, highest priority and most notable revenue field of record, it's important to tell us that, because we want to be able to provide you the very best and most actionable reporting information. So if your team leverages a non-standard amount field, we should have a conversation, because there's a good chance that we can set you up to get more accurate and more telling reporting for your org.
Awesome, awesome, and we'll talk about how we kind of plug that in there. So the what, like what is it? You kind of touched on this a little bit, but can you go a little bit further in? You talked about like ARR, NRR from that Salesforce. Like, is this a custom amount field? Is this one of the standard ones within Salesforce? Is this a let's see, a formula field? Like what is this field that we're plugging in here?
Definitely. I will start at the back and say that formula fields are generally trickier for us to handle. Formula fields, when they're edited, often don't trigger a change on the field itself. Often it changes trigger on the variables that contribute to the formula field. So if you're planning on using that, reach out to us. We may be able to help, but in general, we would prefer a standard amount field. And by standard, I mean non-formula. It is custom in the sense that you go in and you tell us what, often it has that underscore C at the end of the API name, indicating it's a custom field that your team has created within Salesforce. So if you're using something like that, and you want to make sure that your attribution touch points, as they flow downstream, have their revenue associated to that kind of value instead, this is precisely what we're talking about here. Usually a custom, non-standard, non-formula amount field that can be pulling in from many different sources, or can be mathematically partitioned to be anything you need. If it's on the opportunity object and it's a custom field that's not the standard amount, that's generally what we're looking for here.
Yeah, I think we've worked with so many clients, and when Casey says you can reach out to us, so Casey's a part of the support team here, so leads up that and really helps navigate all those questions. So when he speaks of us, that's what he's referring to there.
Yes.
But real quick, so one of the common things that I've seen is like when we're working with clients, we say, well, are you using a custom amount field? And that's often like not known, right? And so we can do that. How do we dig into that, or how can we help the client, or what's a good way of finding that?
Definitely. There are a couple ways. One is more reactively and one is more proactive. On the reactive side, that usually appears as not seeing the downstream revenue on your attribution touchpoints that you would expect. Maybe you think that this opportunity is worth $10,000, but we're reporting and showing in our Discover dashboard or on the attribution touch points themselves that, hey, we're seeing, 6,500. And you may wonder why that may be. Well, more often than not, we can run a query, or you can show us on your opportunities a number of different fields, and we can show you how, hey, you either do have this set up and we're keying off of that custom field, or you don't have this custom revenue amount set up and we're keying off the standard amount field. And here's both of those values on this opportunity. It looks like you're expecting field A to be contributing when it's actually field B. So that can be kind of a reactive way to do it when they say, hey, why are these numbers off? Proactively, obviously, during setup and implementation, your team can discuss with ours, any number of folks, professional services, implementation, even support, how to best go about leveraging, this non-standard field. You say, hey, we report an MRR, or we have this weird, annualized value that we want to put in here instead. Usually that boils down to that custom amount field work. And so for savvy customers, they may have a knowledge and understanding of that ahead of time, and we can kind of nip that in the bud. But just to be totally transparent, and I say this all the time with Marketo Measure, nearly any change you make works both retroactively and moving forward as well. So never feel like you're already stuck in a hole or you're too far down and now we have to report on the normal amount because it's been 3 months that way. Not so fast. We can go in and dynamically make those changes to make sure your old data is reporting on the settings that you want them to, and that your new data will as well.
Yeah, I think that's one of the powerful things about the tool, right? Is we can always make adjustments and reprocess the data. Yeah. I think you touched on this earlier, where how you identify the custom amount field or even a custom field in Salesforce. And for those who are not as familiar with the back end of Salesforce, it's not the friendly name. So the friendly name is what would populate on like the opportunity itself, and it would say amount, right? I've had many clients that see, well, it just says amount, so that's our cut, like that's the standard amount field because it just says amount. And when we actually look at the API name, and which Casey was getting at, so that _C, that's where you see, oh, this actually is a custom field. It just was relabeled to be a little more friendly, and it's amount. So that's where, it's always good to have a Salesforce admin as part of the initial like kickoff and stage. So it's a great movement, great next step to our next W, which is when. So when can we do this? We touched on that a little bit already, but when's the best time to do it? And then when are other times in which we can?
Absolutely. The best time is during implementation, and the second best time is now. And I mean that in the sense that there is no really wrong time to do it. Maybe it's worth consulting with your team if you had been reporting on numbers X and Y and suddenly there's a big shift and change, and it may be worth, running that past to say, hey, we have an expected revenue amount change that's going to come through, and it's going to make our Marketo Measure reporting look a little different. But like we mentioned before, if this is the accurate data that you're hoping to use, we want to help you get that ASAP so that you can start reporting as soon as possible. I don't necessarily think there's a totally wrong time to do it, unless, there are a couple rabbit holes we could go down. But again, the general rule of thumb is the sooner the better.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Just to add in color from past clients, they reported off of the standard amount field. As you mentioned earlier, like they moved to an ARR, and that's their new way of reporting, and from here on now to the future. And so it's one of those where it's like, yeah, you can change that. If that's the new field in which you have to do, we can make that pivot. So it's if the business changes, we can change with it.
And to speak to that a little bit, even if you decide to use a different field down the road, or for any reason revert back to the amount field, same thing applies. You put new settings in and save them, and we'll go through and process your old and future facing data with those new settings in mind. So even if you are, kind of tippy-toeing about how you don't know quite how it's going to look, it's nothing that we can't undo or change to meet your needs, different fields, etc. So that's, again, one of the beautiful pieces of the platform is rarely do you really lock yourself in. We can almost always undo, change, switch around, be water in that way.
Yeah, that's good. And so our final W before we move into like the where, which you're kind of seeing here, is the why. We've touched on a lot of the whys, right? We have to report on closed won revenue. That is truly what attribution is. I think one of the challenges that I've seen is clients may have a open opportunity value, and then they have a closed opportunity value on the opportunity. So they have a pipeline value, and then they actually have the actualized value. In a scenario like that, which one's more important, or why would we want to only do closed one in that
Sure.
scenario?
Yeah, that's a great point. Part of the reason why you wouldn't want to, let's start by saying that we can only report on one of those at a time. So if you have 3 revenue fields that you want us to point at in scenario A, B, or C, we have no way of bifurcating or differentiating between those scenarios. What you could potentially do, and maybe this is going a bit far, so apologies, Ian, but my mind likes to
All
explore.
good. Yeah.
If you do have, let's say, 3 different scenarios when you want revenue value A in scenario A and revenue field B in scenario B, et cetera, you could have each of those simply via a workflow or some sort of flow roll up into one master field on your opportunity. So you can let us know, and you can use your own logic to do the behind the scenes action. But as long as you're giving us one actionable field to work on, we can do that. So you do have other tools at your disposal for the CRM savvy folks. But if you're expecting us to be able to pipe in 3 different fields for 3 different scenarios, there's a better plan is to do a little more legwork on your end and roll that up to one.
Yeah, nailed it. Yeah, I mean that's exactly. I mean, I've worked with clients where they literally had a rolling 5-year contract on one opportunity.
Yeah.
And so they, then they wanted to see the entire journey of that. And so they had to plug all that in, but the reality is we needed that one field that would roll up all 5 of those values
Yeah.
on that opportunity. So it's an interesting journey. Every client has a different way in which they do opportunities, but I think this was a great overview of that. So let's talk a little bit about the where, and then some of these settings in this opportunities area here. The main ones would really be the bottom 4. So the default opportunity amount, custom opportunity amount, custom close date, custom created date. Let's talk a little bit. How do we implement this? What are really the best practices in getting all of that set up if we have those as custom settings?
Definitely. So this is venturing kind of one half a step away, I suppose, from custom revenue stuff, but it does talk importantly in the context of opportunity setup. So definitely important to mention. Candidly speaking, the default opportunity amount is someone that I've maybe never seen a customer use that in 5 or 6 years. Maybe that's
Okay.
further upstream than me, but for folks that, for example, want the default op amount to be $10,000 for some reason, we can accommodate that, but that's definitely not something that we see nearly anybody do. Most folks appreciate actually setting the actual or expected opportunity amount on a case by case basis. So that's one that I don't see have a lot of legs. Obviously, these other 3 are more important. This one that says custom opportunity amount field is the one that we're talking about here. So I might have Ian go through and do a quick example of what we would want to see there. Let's say that you have MRR, or monthly recurring revenue, or I guess more commonly ARR. Same idea. You can go in and right in here, you uncheck the box, and then you punch in whatever that value is. And we're not talking about the field name that is the friendly name that just says amount. This takes a little bit of knowledge of your CRM setup to know what the API name is here. So you can see that Ian has one in here, converted amount _ C. Beautiful. What that conversion is, up to you. However you're delivering that to us, up to you. I will have one caveat to talk about in a common pratfall at the end, but we'll get there when we get there. If this is what he wants to do, he would simply input the field here. We'd make sure it's not a formula field, and he would click save. You don't recheck the box. The UI is a little interesting. If you recheck the box, it's going to revert back to production settings. So you leave it unchecked, punch in what you need, etc. So clearly, this isn't an actual field that Ian's looking at in a CRM. This is just a test. If it were, you wouldn't see the error, and we would simply have saved here. And you'd expect sometime in the next, I don't know, 48 hours or so for us to go through and run our calculations for your attribution touchpoints off of this amount field rather than the standard one. So that's the field here that most accurately relates to what we've been discussing so far. Do you want to touch on the next 2 as well, Ian, or should we? It's up to you.
Yeah, I think it'd be just since people are in there and
Sure.
if they have questions, we have the custom close date and custom created date at a high level scenario of what that is, and
Definitely.
obviously the change would be the same, and how we would update that.
Absolutely. So the ideology there is the same in the sense that there are standard amount fields, but also standard created date fields and close date fields on the opportunity. Those are pre-built into Salesforce, and with no extra config on your end, that's what we're going to key off of. Most importantly is that those windows help us understand when an op is created and when it's closed, in the sense that we only give attribution touch points when they happen before an opportunity has closed. So what that means is that if an opportunity closes in your CRM on June 1st, but someone on the account has a cool form fill on June 3rd, we don't believe that that touch point was applicable to that opportunity closing. Obviously, that makes sense in the sense that, the opportunity's already closed. This one that happened after clearly wasn't a contributor. So the standard close date is what determines that. If you want to tell us what that close date is, maybe you have one that for your attribution, you only want to, a month and a half before the, pen to ink actually closes, and you think that's when we should stop allocating touch points to that op. You can do the same thing here, where you uncheck it, you punch in a custom field date, that API name, like we're saying, and save. And that will change, expand, or contract the window that we look at for touch point eligibility for those contacts, those folks that have touch points on the opportunity. And so the same thing applies to create date, a little less common, but obviously you can do the same thing. Maybe the soonest MQL date is when you want the create date to be for that opportunity in our eyes, for example. That's a semi-common one. You can use
Yeah.
that to help in your determining as to whether or not we're creating attribution touch points for activity that happens before or after those custom create and close dates.
Yep. Yeah, that's a perfect example. The MQL, it's often what is the identifier for an open op, but the op may have been opened earlier. And so it's just one of those where it's the product and the team obviously recognizes that there needs to be some flexibility in how you're managing those, and so that we can give you a proper timeline of really those attributed touch points within the confines of when the op opened and when it closed, because those are really meaningful. So, well, Casey, this was an awesome session. I really appreciate you just jumping in and willing to join and talk about this. Again, I know you and I have run into this quite a bit with clients, and so hopefully this will be of help for anyone who watches it. I really appreciate the time.
Definitely. And I have one more thing that I wanted to say for our very special multiple currency users out there.
Yeah.
The value that you give us, if it's a custom op amount, should be non-converted if you're using multiple currencies. We do the
Mm.
conversions for you. So if you have an opportunity and your custom date is, converted USD underscore C for your custom field, that may not play super nicely with us. We're always going to try and do the conversion from the ops native currency to your default one in Salesforce. So let us do the conversions for you with these custom fields, and that's how you'll get accurate information on your touch points in your reporting, et cetera. Just had to throw that out there
No,
for
that is
folks that use the multiple currencies.
no, that's money. I think that's a great point and great call out. So I appreciate that, Casey, because that is sometimes a hard one because clients are already doing it. They buy this tool and then there's an adjustment that needs to be made there as well. So
Definitely.
that's a great call out. I appreciate
Yeah,
that.
absolutely
Awesome,
important
man.
that we show, how open we can be for you. If we'll provide the framework and then let you guys customize how you want us to work with that as much as we can. So, definitely the revenue amount is a great example of us working with you to get your data just the way that you would expect it to be for your reporting.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Absolutely. Appreciate you, Casey. Thanks so much, man, for jumping in.
A pleasure. Thanks, Ian.